This is the third and final stage of the Skoda Women's Tour on RGT. This is the crit stage, and honestly, this is the one I was least excited for of this whole stage race, mostly because this is a course that I had ridden before, and a lot of the reason I did this stage race was I wanted to ride the magic roads of the route they were actually using, or that some of the roads they actually would have used for the women's tour. That's a really cool feature, to be able to ride, bespoke roads and the same ones that the pros are racing on. This is a course that I actually had raced 1 or 2 times before this, I think. But I will say this actually turned out to be the most fun e-race I have ever had. And I don't say that lightly, because I have really enjoyed e-racing. I mean, if you've seen my channel, you've seen how much racing I've been doing in quarantine. Obviously, doing it because I like it, because it's fun. But I think this was probably the most fun I've had in any e-race. And I think part of that is down to the level of competition in this one. And then it's also the crit mechanics of RGT, which I have delved into before, but this, I think, was my first time racing one of these with a big group of strong people and a lot of people that are on a similar level. So right here, I'm going to put in a little dig before this little uphill, and this is sort of the first tester I gave on this course. You could see on that one, I was right on the wheel of the guy in front of me when I decided to stand up and kick. And for the first few revolutions of the pedal, I was doing 500-600 watts, but I was just running into the back of the guy in front of me. I wasn't really going anywhere. So that's a learning experience, and I'll definitely come back to that. But we also started a couple of laps late here on the video. I'm not sure if I forgot to hit the hotkey for recording, or if I, didn't hit the hotkeys at the same time or whatever, but I noticed pretty early on that it wasn't going and just reached over and hit that hotkey. So it was like in the middle of the second lap that I started it up. So this group is kind of all the strongest guys, I think, that were doing the women's tour. This is the group where they were keeping track of the overall. So I'm actually not racing for the overall, which gives me an interesting opportunity to kind of be the animator here, because I'm not really worried about time. And the reason I'm not racing for the overall here is the first day, stage 1, I had to work that day, and all of the guys who were keeping track of the GC, they had a group on one of the Facebook. I can't remember if it's the RGT user event group or the RGT cycling riders. There's a few groups on the internet. In one of them, they had a spreadsheet and they were keeping track of times, but it was specifically for what for me is noon time. I think in the UK it's probably more like 6 or 7 p.m. That was the time that they had decided to come together and race for the overall. So I missed the first stage in that time zone, so I'm not on the spreadsheet, which is a bummer in one sense, but in another sense, this is actually something I do in stage races in real life. I'm a bad time trialist, so especially a stage race with a time trial, one thing I will do is just kind of use the time trial more as a warm-up and less as a race. I'm not going to just sandbag it, but use it to open the legs up and know that I'm going to lose a bunch of time, so that when it comes time to ride a stage that I am a little bit more suited for, I am a bad time trialist also. Not sure if I'm bad at time trials because I don't like them, or I don't like them because I'm bad at them, or, kind of a chicken and egg scenario there. But what it comes down to is I don't have the gear, and I don't really ever work on my steady state power. But I'll bleed some time in the time trial so that no one is worried about me on the GC, and then I'm able to, on a stage that does suit me, something with like a punchy climb or something like that, I'm able to get into a group with guys who are racing for the GC, and no one is really eyeballing me. So that's something I think I can do here, and toward the end of a stage race, people who really are racing for overall time tend to start racing a little bit more defensively, meaning that they're more concerned with doing something that would get them dropped and losing a bunch of time than they are with racing forward and attacking and gaining time. That's because you get kind of married to your position, and the same kind of attacks that'll get you time could also get you dropped. So that is why I'm the one attacking right here. Or at least that's what I think is part of the psyche. I have it in my mind that I'm going to be the animator for this race because I don't have anything to lose time-wise. And so I'm starting, we're still very early right here, but I'm starting to see if I can find the flow of the course, which this is something I do in real life crits as well. Just take a few laps with the group to kind of see how fast everyone else is cornering, and then maybe start trying to push it through a few corners and see where I can find maybe a few seconds or a little bit faster line, but not really try to break away necessarily. Maybe I'm even doing this in the pack. I'm like letting a bike length or two go out to the guy in front of me and then seeing if I can find a line through the corner that closes that, or use those indicators of like, okay, what's fast and what's not. Because pre-riding is one thing, and you definitely need to do that to see like where the potholes are and all that kind of stuff. But it's impossible to kind of know how fast other people are going to be taking things until you do it yourself. And we do have Paraday going off the front here, which if you watch my stage 2 video, we all know that he could do this. So I'm going to try and use my momentum through here. And I was really just trying to get up to him, but I slingshotted all the way through, and that's something I'm taking note of. So the shape of this course, it's kind of in America, we would call this a hot dog crit. I don't know if, I think we eat the most hot dogs. I don't know if y'all even have hot dogs in other parts of the world, but it's basically a 4-corner crit, but it's a really elongated rectangle. So the 2 corners on the ends are almost a 180. They're very close together. 2 90-degree corners on the end. And on this course, there's the little overpass thing that goes over the course. It's like a walkway between buildings. And under that, the road kind of dips down. So it's a quick 4% downhill, flat, 4% back up. And what I'm noticing as I go through here is I can use that downhill to get some speed going, come by everybody on the flat, and then they have to respond on the uphill, and they're hitting that uphill with a little bit less speed. It's much harder to accelerate on an uphill, especially one that's short. It's it's easy to carry speed through it if you already have speed. So here I go. I want to build some speed on this downhill and then hit the uphill fast. And the mistake I've made that time is that I was right on the wheel when I started that attack. And again, like the first one, if you're right on the wheel and you don't already have a speed differential, RGT is going to have you run into the back of that person. That's part of the pack dynamics function of this game is, if you're riding in a peloton in the real world, it's always speeding up and slowing down in tiny increments. And the best riders are the riders that can feather their power and maybe slide to the left, slide to the right, sit up a little bit more, use their draft or lack thereof to keep themselves going the same speed as everyone around them, regardless of those changes. And if you're doing that well, you're not hitting your brakes and you're riding really efficiently in the draft. Conversely, there are people who are not great at that, and as those little gaps go out, they pedal too hard, so they're putting out more power than they needed to get to that wheel, and then they have to hit the brakes to scrub off some of that speed. And each one of those is probably not a big deal, but if you're doing that once or twice every minute over the course of a 3 or 4 hour road race, the amount of power you're losing is crazy. It can be a lot. The amount of power that you are spending to go the same speed as someone who's using a lot less power, and the amount you're scrubbing off with the brakes. So on RGT, your avatar will actually need to slow down as the people in front of you slow down. And in a crit, there's a special version of this that we call the accordion effect, where coming into the corner, it's sort of a game of chicken where each person has to be willing to take that corner at the same speed without braking. And as one person brakes, the person behind them tends to brake a little bit more. And that's exponential as you go back. Each person continues that pattern. So as you're running into a corner, it can be strung out, and then everyone slams into the back of each other. That's the accordion being pushed together. And then when you come out of that corner, the people on the front who have a clean line are able to accelerate more quickly, and things string back out. So the farther back on that accordion you are, the more brakes you're hitting going into the corner, and then the harder you have to accelerate coming out of the corner. So for the same average speed around the lap, you're doing a lot more work. And anyone who's a regular crit racer would know this. But I do think this is the first time on RGT. The other races I've done on this course have broken up pretty significantly from the gun, and the accordion effect is affected by a few things. One of them is how tight are the turns, how technical is the circuit, and the other thing is field size. So obviously the bigger the accordion is, the more exaggerated that effect is. So this is my first time staying with a bigger group. It looks like we got 2, 4, 6, 8, probably 10, 12 guys in this group, 9, something like that. This is my first time doing a crit on this course where this many people would stay together for this long and be at this close of a level in terms of power output and skill level. So this is the first time I've really seen that accordion effect come into play. But like if you're looking right now, you can see my power going red. I've heard a few different explanations for the red numbers, but basically it means that the power you're putting in is not actually pushing you forward as fast as it should be. I've heard that that's just wasted power and it's the same as zero. I've heard that that's like pedaling while you were braking on your bike. If you can imagine, if you were pedaling while you were still holding the brakes, that's the effect you're getting, that it's virtual braking, but effectively, you're wasting a little bit of watts is the point of those red numbers. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is like you're running into the back of people like I am now, and your avatar is basically slowing down to avoid, crashing. And as I've said before, you can clearly phase through people on RGT, but it doesn't work the same as Zwift where you can kind of move through them as if they weren't there. It is costing you those red numbers, again, that you saw just a second ago. Your avatar is going to break a little bit at least, and I think that helps the pack dynamics be a little bit more realistic. I was debating with someone why the pack on Zwift, it's so hard to drop a pack when you're riding on Zwift, when you're racing on Zwift, and they were like, oh, the drafting is unrealistic, it's too much draft, was the argument. And I said, I think the draft is correct. I think you kind of have to think about it differently, though. It's as if, a lot of times you're riding in a big pack. There are people who are willing to pull, but if they're not in those first 3, 4, 5 wheels, they have to do a bunch of work making their way through that pack. They're probably like accelerating a little and hitting the brakes, trying to find little gaps and holes. On Zwift, they automatically phase to the front. So at any given moment, whoever is willing to pedal the hardest is at the front pedaling the hardest, which is not the case in real life. Additionally, no one is having to hit the brakes ever. There are no brakes. So imagine if you were in a peloton where automatically whoever is pedaling the hardest is pulling, and there's zero speed being lost to braking and positioning and all that kind of stuff. So, it looks like these little red numbers here and there on RGT are not that significant, but I would argue that they don't look that significant in real life when you see a peloton roll by. It looks like everybody's just rolling smoothly, but the difference between those little brakes and little accelerations people are doing and complete 100% efficiency is a pretty big difference. And I think that's why you see brakes go away and work on RGT, and races break up so much more on RGT. I think that's why I had never experienced the accordion effect on this course really until now, because the races I've done on this course, the stronger people have been able to get a break and stay away the whole time. I think those pack dynamics have something to do with it. So that is a cool function, but it's kind of multiplied coming into these corners because there are corners that also your watts will go red because you're basically virtually breaking into the corner. It's forcing you to slow down to a speed where you could take that corner. You can't just whip around every corner at 35 miles per hour or whatever. And if I understand correctly, they did some estimates based on like how steep is the wrong word, how sharp is the corner, how technical is the corner, and what would be sort of a maximum speed, and it kind of caps you there. So that is one thing I'm sort of trying to figure out. I haven't been able to find anyone who's really, really nailed down what those are. And I think it's probably because the more realistic it is, the harder it's going to be to pin down. I don't think we're going to find a number and be like, oh, you can take a 90-degree corner at 25 miles per hour every time. It seems like it's a little bit more dynamic than that. Like it's different if you're accelerating or you're slowing down. It's different if you're in a group. But I think the function, those two factors, the cornering and then the braking for people who are in front of you, they come together in the corners in the same way that they do, or a similar way that they do in real life. I'm trying not to get too hung up on like, is everything an exact simulation of real life? Because of course it's never going to be exactly like real life. You can't turn, there's no wind, whatever. But this is, I think the more of these factors get added in, the more dynamic the racing is going to be. So I really want to focus on what those factors are and what makes the racing more dynamic and more interesting. And those two braking functions, the slowing you down for the corner and slowing you down for the riders in front of you, come together on a crit like this where, you know, if the front rider is being slowed down for the corner and then the next rider is being slowed down not only for the corner but also because that first rider is in front of them, you truly can get that accordion effect like in a real crit. So that's part of the theory I have here, and some of my thinking for a move like this, you know, partially trying to use that little dip down as a springboard and see if I can get away, but I'm also thinking that potentially I could ride these corners a little bit smoother. So you can see I'm backing way off my power there. I backed off into the single digits, and then I'm going to punch a little bit between these two corners and back off again. And then I'm going to punch again right here really hard and stay on it. And my thinking is that even if they're getting back up to me, whoever is more than a couple wheels back there, I think they're probably going to have to do bigger surges than I'm doing. And I'm not saying I know any of this for sure. What I'm saying is you're watching the process of me figuring all of it out. I'm doing little variations every time through and trying to see what works and what doesn't work. But my general theory is that this might work like a normal crit where the best thing to do, especially, well, really to be on your own, you can ride a little bit smoother because you're never having to brake for the person in front of you. It's a little different from a real crit in that you can't just choose your own line. In a real crit, if you're by yourself, you can generally take a smoother line because there are parts of the course where maybe you wouldn't swing wide so early because someone is going to cut to the apex of that corner before you, and they're going to get around you, get in front of you, but you're both going to end up going slower because you're going to have to hit the brakes. But when you're on your own, you can take those, you can set up those lines a little wider and take the exact, you know, perfect, smoothest line through the corner. That's a little different because you can't choose sort of left to right where you're going. But the principle of not having to brake for someone who's in front of you definitely still applies. And I think the principle of being able to maybe find like a maximum entry speed or a maximum entry wattage for the corners, I think that's a unique scenario. So what I'm starting to do here is try to, especially on these little downhills, I'm realizing that our speed as a group goes way up on these downhills, and the farther back I am, the less I have to do to maintain that speed. So what I need to be doing is letting off a little on the downhill and then kicking a little harder on the uphill. And, I'm putting in a little dig to cover this move, which if it was anybody other than this guy, Paraday, I would not be doing that. But he was able to sneak away on stage 2 and put down a crazy, crazy ride, averaging huge numbers. Once he got away, I kept thinking that our group, we had a rolling group of 2 or 3 at any given time that I kept thinking was going to take time back on him, but he was just able to put down so much solo power that we never really got much back on him. He paced himself really well, and he obviously has that time trial power. So with everything I was just talking about in mind, the fact that I think you could potentially go faster on your own if you're smart about it. That does, you got to factor in wind still. You're not going to be drafting at all, and everyone in the pack is going to be drafting. But if ever there were a course that a shrewd rider could go solo, I actually think this might be it. And I haven't figured out exactly how yet, but I do think that the possibility is out there, because all of these corners are going to provide pinch points where the group is going to get slowed down. And the corners come pretty thick and fast. It's like a corner, probably if you averaged it out, a corner every 30 seconds or something. So if you think about the group having to do a little slowdown every 30 seconds, that maybe you're able to not slow down as much. Over time, that builds up. The big thing is just being able to get that clean gap and stick it for a few laps. So I have all that in mind because that's kind of what I've been trying to do. Find a way to get away and then see what's the most efficient way to ride by myself. And I've also got it in my mind that I cannot let Paraday get a gap, because yesterday he got kind of an innocuous gap. I mean, not to say that he didn't work for it, but I did think that we would bring some time back between those big climbs, and we just didn't. So I know I cannot let him go, and I also know it's going to be harder to get to him the longer I let those moves go. So every time he goes, I'm going to try and respond and get there fairly quickly. And so he's going right here, and I know I can't sit back and wait for the group to get him. I need to just be there, because potentially, this could be it. If he rides like he rode yesterday and we get a 2-up move. I do think Melville here is he was also in that race yesterday, so he's also on high alert. That's one of the cool things about racing with the same people over and over. You start to kind of learn everyone's racing style and who to watch and who to mark and sort of what's going on. And several of us have talked about these races like in the groups and on Strava and all that kind of stuff. Just, like, hey, good race, those moves were good, or like I thought we were going to get some time back, all that kind of stuff. So that's a cool thing about this stage race format, is that I'm racing against the same people a few days in a row, so we start to get to know each other and have a little bit of a community kind of friendly rivalry thing going on. That's one of the cool things about RGT, I'll say. Sort of not to say the Zwift community isn't great. The Zwift community is amazing. It's kind of incredible how large and how robust it is and how personal it's still able to be. But RGT just being a platform that's a little newer and a little smaller, everybody feels like they're sort of in it together and in on the ground floor of something. So everybody who's riding on it is pretty excited about it and into it and like engaged with the community aspect of it, which I'll talk about that a little bit. So RGT is a lot less of a social media platform than Zwift is, and it's also a lot less of an MMO than what Zwift is. I say that Zwift is a social media platform in the sense that, like on social media, everyone has a profile. You can comment on each other's stuff. You can follow people or friend them. I forget actually what Zwift calls it, but all those sort of social media type functions are there. And then I say MMO, meaning there's a leveling system where you gain experience points based on the stuff that you do, and those experience points unlock things, abilities and gear, and like a World of Warcraft or something. And RGT really forgoes all of that to be more of a simulator. I think for that reason, it's kind of positioning itself as the more serious option. That's also part of, having the cornering. It seems to be it's positioning itself as the more serious option for serious racers, serious training. It's like there's no extra stuff built into RGT. There's no frills. I think that actually makes a sort of more tight-knit community in a way. Also, it also takes a little bit more to run RGT. Like, you can't use a speed and cadence sensor. You have to have something that's doing real power, either a smart trainer that has power built in, or like power meter pedals, or a power meter an actual power meter that's transmitting power numbers. You can't do what people do on Zwift, which is run just a speed and cadence sensor, and then based on like your roll down time, it generates a virtual power number. There's none of that on RGT. You have to be a little bit more committed and have a little bit more serious of a setup. So I think that, combined with how much more serious and race-based the platform is, actually creates a community in a way, because it pulls people who want those features together, and it sort of weeds out some of the most casual people. Like on Zwift, they're as a, I guess, a racer, I would consider myself. What really keeps me in these virtual platforms is the racing and group aspect. But it's not to ride around at 1 to 2 watts a kilo so much and have a chat with people. I like drafting. I like pushing ourselves. I like, whether it's working together to try and ride a route faster, or whether it's working against each other and trying to race and get a gap and all that kind of stuff. Man, really good counterattack from Paraday there, I gotta say. That time I was trying out, what if I'm on the front with no one in front of me, and then I attack on that little uphill. And I think because the people in the back were getting the draft on the downhill as I was accelerating, that sort of neutralized my attack. But Paraday, I think he saw what I was doing, and him and Hubbard came over the top there. That was a really good attack, and it made that whole lap very, very fast. It seems like RGT, though, to get back to that, it does have a little bit more of a core group of people that are sort of in it for the same stuff. So I made this distinction somewhere. People were talking about my crit comparison video, which, if you haven't watched that, I did a RGT crit on this course, actually, and a Zwift crit in the same day, and just sort of compared and contrasted the experience. And I was discussing that with some people, and one of the big takeaways from the discussion after the analysis video, the analogy we came up with was that each platform kind of has its own space. Zwift will be McDonald's, it's going to be everywhere, and it's going to be the most accessible and prolific, and RGT is more like, your nice steakhouse or something. Both exist, but they sort of have a different purpose and a different clientele. McDonald's is the low bar to entry, pull up to the drive-through. It's not a lot of money, and RGT is for the more discerning customer, I'll say. Having said that, I really like both. I'm not picking a winner here. There are elements. I've raced on both in the last week, and I think they both have their strong points. But having said that, I think this was the most fun race I've done. You can see there's all these little dynamic moves happening. We're sort of slowly splitting this group up. Everybody's taking little digs. We've got Paraday right now going to the front and making it fast. It feels a lot more dynamic than some of the Zwift racing, which Zwift racing is probably really good for me specifically, in that it ends up being just a hard effort that's close to threshold for a long time, which I need, but it's maybe not quite as mentally engaging because I'm not really thinking about each corner. I'm not really thinking about my positioning. So what I start doing here as this rolls on is I try to come into these downhills kind of on the back of the group, get up a good head of steam, and then power through, power around like I just did right there. So if you watch the gradient and my speed and then also my power through this corner, I'm able to take this one super smooth. 0 red numbers, a good smooth line, and hold good speed all the way through. So that's crucial that I was able to ride that whole thing really smooth. Even though these guys are getting up to me, they had to do more to get to that same spot at the same time. Right here, it looked like Paraday might be counterattacking, so I just put a little dig in on the uphill to get across to him. I actually kind of want him to get away and for me to be there with him because I think it'll be easier to sprint from a smaller, more select group. And I also kind of want to test out that breakaway. Can we stay away from a big, strong group like this? We never fully committed for like more than a lap at a time, though. I think that was the crucial mistake, is when he would see me there or I would see him there, we would both kind of not fully shut it down, but look at the other one to be making the moves and getting that speed going. I also think we kind of had different ideas about how to ride this course quickly that weren't totally compatible. So right there, I actually went full super tuck on that little downhill and didn't get dropped. So I was able to recover some from that last attack I did. Seems like everybody's kind of feeling it. And it also seems like we dropped a couple of guys from the group, which is good. That's part of what I'm trying to do. I'm also, part of this is just fact finding. I'm trying to figure out what will work and what is fast on this course and in this platform. And part of it is I'm also trying to make these guys work a little harder than me, whether that's dropping them and gapping them off or just making them burn some more matches. But this was, so what I start doing is dangling off the back a little farther before I get my I keep saying head of steam, before I go and get more speed than them and come past them. And I start to realize that having that little gap, which again is a thing in real life, I've heard it referred to as the sprinter's gap in real life, where you leave maybe 1 or 2 bike lengths to the person in front of you right before you're going to crank it up, and then you can kind of accelerate through their draft and get a clean line around them. Rather than trying to accelerate as you come around on their hip, it's going to be a lot easier for them to latch on when you're doing that, when you're trying to make that acceleration next to them, because they just have to do the same thing. Whereas if you accelerate through their draft and then as you're coming over the top, you already have significantly more speed. That's a little bit more mentally, it's a little bit more of a barrier to them to get back onto you, but also just physically you are coming by them at a higher speed than what they're doing. So I start trying to sort of fine tune in, dangling off the back coming into the downhill. So right here I'm backing way off the power. You can see, I think I was doing 81 for a second there, 63. I mean, I'm backing way off my power in hopes that that will let me dangle a little bit. And it really didn't drop me back super far there. I think everyone is feeling all these attacks a little bit. So that wasn't an ideal time to attack because I was right on the back of those guys, and I would have been wasting those first few hard pedal strokes while I'm just running right into the back of them. But the good news is I was able to recover for a second there and, get my heart rate down, get the legs feeling a little bit better, a little less of that burning sensation. So this, might cause alarm bells for some people, but this is actually right where I want to be, kind of dangling off the back of this group and I'm doing 128 for a second there. I actually did a little bit too much and came all the way back up to them. What I want to do is enter this downhill dangling off the back like I was maybe 30, 40 yards before we hit the downhill. So I'm identifying the conditions for what's going to make a good attack and what attacks are going to stick, and where I need to just use that to get a little rest and a little recovery. And basically, it's all about positioning, and that's true, in a real crit too. It's like if you're kind of off to one side and the group slows down, you have two options, and one of them is to sort of sit in and take a respite, and the other is to attack and use that speed differential. I thought I might be able to shoot this gap right here pretty easily, and I didn't quite get the steam I wanted, but again, this is me just trying stuff out. What that did do was separate myself and Paraday for a second there, which is kind of the ideal scenario. I know if I'm going to get away with anybody, I want it to be him, because I know he has that diesel power. So my hope would be if we could get away together, maybe he could put down some steady power on the straights. I could punch coming out of the corners and keep us rolling pretty quickly. And, you know, together we could net a pretty high average speed. It does look like we've maybe even lost a couple more guys at this point. I'm not sure if they're going to get back on, but you can tell just the constant attrition, and a lot of that is me with these little attacks. I'm just trying to keep the pressure on, make sure this race stays hard. So that one was just a little tiny one, but I wanted to, you know, I had the momentum and I had the position to keep it fast there. And one thing I'm doing, so I mentioned the shape of the course, kind of hot dog shape. I mentioned the little dip down under the walkway up there. So that dip down is actually not dead center on the course. That dip down is kind of it's closer to one side than the other. So it does make it where the corners and the straightaway set up differently. There's one corner where you come out of the corner immediately downhill, immediately uphill, just about, and then you have a long drag to the corner. And then there's an inverse of that, which is right here. You have these two corners, almost a 180, very close together, two 90-degree corners. And then you have a long drag out of the corners, and then you have the downhill, the uphill, and after the uphill, you're pretty much right into that corner. And so one thing I was doing was trying to sort of test out where I want to get my speed going on this downhill. This is just what's working for me also. I mean, it might be for a different rider, or a rider with a different power profile. This all works out differently, but one thing I was doing was using this uphill to sort of feather my speed into the corner so that I could go fast that whole time and then not hit the brakes really hard on the corner. I could kind of back off my power at the last second, but because you're on the uphill, that's going to slow you down enough. There's also sort of the inverse, which is where I go, if I attack on this one where the dip down is a little bit farther from the next corner, I can attack here, establish a gap on the uphill, and then keep the power on. This allows me to have a really long distance to build my gap, but I have to be cognizant to back off the power a little earlier here because there's not an uphill going into this corner. So see, I backed off my power, and you could see Paraday there was putting down way more power than me into the corner and came flying around me, but it was like he hit a wall right as he came around. And that was the virtual braking for the corner kicking in, because it just won't let you take that corner at like 32 miles per hour. So this gets into sort of my like cyclocross brain. The part of the way I break down a cyclocross course is there are going to be sections where you have to let off the power because it's technical. And there are going to be sections where you have to put down a ton of power or else you're going to fall over, whether that's like, you know, uphill sand or some kind of awkward deep mud, something like that. So I go ahead and like in my brain map out those sections of like, I have to pedal hard here, I have to pedal easy here, and then break down the rest of the course in terms of I could pedal as hard as I want to through all of the rest of these sections, hard or easy. If I pedal hard, where is that going to give me the most bang for my buck? Meaning like, so right here, I attack that downhill, I go up this uphill. The momentum I get from that can carry me the longest distance before I have to slow down for a corner here. And that cuts both ways because it means that everyone behind has the longest distance to get themselves up to speed to catch me, but it also means that when they do that, we may have done the same punch, but I did it earlier, and then I was sort of coasting off that momentum for longer, and they did it right into the corner and then braked immediately. So just thinking about, like, when I put power down, where is that going to get me? How far is that power going to carry me before I have to scrub some of it off? That's one of the factors. And then there's also just the positioning and being able to get a clean line and a clean slingshot effect. That's also huge in cross. There are times where if you're locked into a group, it might be faster to run something just because there's not a clean line to ride through it. Obviously, that's not going to come into play on RGT, but that kind of thinking of, like, there's some factors that you can't just completely control for where on the course you are. You also have to think about what everyone else is doing. How fast are we already rolling? Is the group strung out? Do I have a good clean line in front of me? So right now, Paraday's putting down a big attack, and I'm sort of weighing the pros and cons of, like, how hard should I go into this corner. So I'm actually backing off right here, and my plan is I'm going to save it a little bit. I didn't fully kick right there, fully kick out of this corner. So this is all in out of the corner, and my thinking is hopefully that is that momentum right out of the corner is going to carry me the farthest. But this is an all hands on deck attack for sure. I know that he's trying to put in a race winner. We're coming down to the closing laps. We only have 2.7 miles left, and it seems like maybe he doesn't want to sprint. It seems like maybe he wants to go for the long bomb. So I came around that corner really fast. I was doing 24 around that corner. I did waste a few watts, but there's a smooth corner. There were no red numbers until those two guys got around me, and we took that corner at 23 or 24. So I'm pretty hopeful that if I keep doing that, if I keep applying my power in a smart way, that we're going to get him back. I am really minding the gap, though. On the left there, you can see the number of yards to people. And what I'm thinking here is I want to draft these guys as long as they are sort of willing to pull, and then I'm going to do what I was doing for the attacks earlier on. I'm going to do it less as an attack and more as a slingshot to get myself up to Paraday, and maybe that's how we get away and we stay away to the end is what's going through my mind right now. So this is actually perfect positioning for me. I'm a little bit off the back, but I'm in the draft coming into the downhill. And then I just want to carry this momentum, punch a little bit on the uphill. But yeah, I could see that our group had good momentum there, and he was coming back to us. So we put that fire out just barely, though, I will say. And I think some of that is probably that it seemed like he was pedaling through the corners a lot more than I was. If you listen, a lot of these corners, I am on a smart trainer. It is, adjusting the power for these gradients and stuff. But one thing I'm doing to sort of like make myself back off the power is I'm clicking down a couple of gears coming into the corner and trying to keep my cadence pretty similar, which that's maybe different than how it would be in real life. In real life, you would just coast through the corner. But keeping my cadence about the same when I go down on my power just helps my legs feel a little bit better. And that's, one of those just kind of learning the online racing platform. But I'll click down a couple of gears going into the corner and then click up a couple of gears coming out of the corner and try and keep my cadence around the same thing. And that I think is allowing me to get a little bit of respite, get a little bit of rest coming through those corners. And that's something I am actually good at. I do train the, I guess they call them micro burst style intervals, where you're doing maybe 15 seconds on and 15 seconds off, or maybe you're doing a minute that's just a little bit over threshold, but then you only take a 15 or 20 second rest, and then you do another minute. And it's not so much about raising your power as it is about raising your ability to recover in a really short time. And that's something that's really huge, especially in cyclocross, because like I said, there are going to be sections of the course that are technical that you have to slow down for because you're going to slip out or whatever the case is. But there are points of the course where you just have to stop pedaling. And if you can get some effective recovery in those sections, for people who don't train that, those 5, 10, 15 seconds where you're off the pedals are not enough to really do anything. But if you train your body to be used to that stimulus, you can take those little micro recoveries, and it really helps you. So that's something I'm trying to play to my advantage. From this point in the race, we've done a ton of attacks, we've traded attacks, and we're really coming down to the finale. I don't want to go from 1 mile out. That's anything between like 3 to 1 mile out is in this sort of it's a bad zone for me, where what's going to happen if I go from that distance, I'll probably waste my sprint or waste my legs for the sprint. I'm not going to actually sprint. I'm going to be going at that, just over threshold kind of VO2 pace. And I'm not great at that kind of a steady effort. So I'm probably going to get caught. I'm probably going to get caught right at the line. And then because it's such a frenzied pace at that point, I'm not going to be able to get any recovery, and I'm not going to be able to sprint well. So I'm basically just setting myself up for failure if I'm going from that distance. Now, I also am not going to let anybody get away, but my strategy is just going to be, and here goes, it looked like Paraday was winding it up there, so I had to just make sure. But my strategy, that's exactly what I was about to talk about from this point, is if someone does try to go, I need to stick it as early as possible. Because generally, if they see someone on their wheel, they don't want to just tow me to the line. They're going to shut it back down and make it a little easier. So another thing I have not fully figured out on RGT is what to do when there are corners really close to the finish. And that's my one problem with this course, is I wish that the finish line were at the end of one of these straightaways. It's really, really, really close to the corner. And when you see that in a real crit, and this is probably the cue I should have taken, when you see that in a real crit, you know that the race is to the final corner. The sprint is not the sprint. The sprint is to the final corner. So the question is, what do I do here? Because obviously it's not going to let me go around this corner at 40. So do I back off? And I didn't here. I just pedaled all the way through. But I definitely was wasting some watts. I don't know. This is an absolute nail biter, though. We are so close on the line, and I ended up third, but that's by 100,000ths of a second. I mean, that was super close between Hubbard and myself there. Yeah, I need to figure out what to do with those corners close to the finish. Should I have backed off in the corner and then sprinted again? Should I have maybe sprinted early so that I could get to and through those corners early, and kind of have wasted my sprint before the corners, but have that gap before the corners? Not sure still, but that's the fun of learning a new platform, That stuff is what's keeping me engaged, trying to figure it out. So this video was a lot about the cornering. Maybe I'll do one where I just do a bunch of races and edit the sprints together and try and see what I can learn from that. That would be cool. These are my numbers here, and 1048, it's pretty good in the sprint. That's like 13, 14 watts a kilo for me. 272 is, it seems like no matter how the race plays out, whether it's real steady, whether it's Zwift or RGT, always between like 270 and 290. So I guess that does speak to the accuracy of my power and training. But yeah, so this was stage 3. I'll put the stage 1 and stage 2 videos up right here. Like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you want to see more of. See you later.